The proliferation of smartphones has undeniably transformed how we document our lives, capturing nearly every moment and experience. From travels to serene hikes in the woods, these devices have become ubiquitous companions, ready to capture any noteworthy event. However, this constant documentation has inadvertently led to an increased frequency of disasters being recorded, resulting in people's last moments being captured on camera. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. In today's episode, we go over 3 times people were captured on camera being fatally mauled by deadly animals. Welcome to Final Affliction. As the war in Ukraine raged, 23-year-old Russian Vladimir Popov decided to leave his home country of Russia. He wanted to avoid compulsory conscription into the armed forces. It was not the life he wanted for himself, and his father, Yuri, didn't want his son to risk his life fighting in battle. Because of this, the two of them moved to Egypt. They left behind Vladimir's mother, who remained at the family home in Balashika, near Moscow, and Vladimir's girlfriend, Anastasia. They headed to Egypt's Red Sea coast. They were finding their feet, enjoying the quiet life. Vladimir found work online as an IT consultant. It was the perfect way to work remotely from the comfort of his own home. The arrangement seemed to be working for the young man and his father, but it wouldn't be long before tragedy would strike. On the 8th of June 2023, just months after moving to Egypt, Yuri and Vladimir walked down to the sea next to Dream Beach Hotel at the Egyptian resort of Hurghada. This picturesque town stretches for almost 30 miles along the Red Sea coastline. The location is stunning. White and golden sandy beaches line the turquoise waters. Luxury yachts and motorboats moor up just offshore, and holidaymakers soak up the sun from the comfort of their sunbeds. Vladimir thought he had struck gold by moving to such a beautiful location. He entered the water that fateful day, heading out for a swim that was to be his last. The calm sea was inviting, the air temperature warm, and the water cool. Vladimir swam outwards from the beach in the safe swimming zone. Several other bathers were enjoying the water at the same time. Then there was a shout. Someone had seen something. Everyone's worst nightmare was coming true. Something that we all think about when we enter the water, the clear image of a dorsal fin breaking through the surface. Everyone made a mad dash for the beach, but as Vladimir turned to swim back to shore, he felt a sharp tug on his leg and let out a cry in pain. What followed was a devastating and truly shocking attack. Not often is an animal attack witnessed by hundreds just meters from the victim, but that's exactly what happened to Vladimir. As people heard Vladimir's cries, they stood up from their seats and looked out across the water. Just 20 feet from the beach, Vladimir was being thrashed around by a huge shark. As he was briefly let go, people could see the terrifying dorsal fin circling the young man. Then he was dragged underwater. He fought back, though. He could be seen trying to push the shark away from him, but it was too agile, too quick. It was too powerful. There was a crashing and a bubbling, a boiling of the water as Vladimir was dragged out of sight. The large gray body of the shark arched out of the water. Vladimir's legs were seen kicking in the air above the surface as he was tumbled and turned upside down. He was spun in circles like a washing machine. Then he resurfaced again, dizzied and disoriented. Vladimir began to make a few strokes towards the shore. How terrified he must have felt, not being able to see the shark, knowing it was somewhere below him, knowing that it was likely coming back for more, circling around his legs before coming in for the kill. The beach was tantalizingly close. He was surrounded in a cloud of red, his own blood pouring into the Red Sea. He made a few anxious strokes forwards. People could see the nervousness in his body language. They could see he wasn't sure what to do, which way to turn. Vladimir could see his father on dry land. He could see the crowd of people that had gathered at the water's edge, but no one was coming for him. "Papa," he cried out, "help me." But there was nothing his father could do. A rescue boat was launched by lifeguards as soon as the attack unfolded. They motored towards Vladimir as he bobbed in the water for a few heart-stopping seconds. Then the shadow of the enormous shark emerged beneath him once more. It hadn't finished with him yet. Its jaws opened wide as it came up from below. It grabbed Vladimir again, this time around his torso, and dived deep underwater with the young Russian in its jaws. Witnesses reported seeing Vladimir's limp and lifeless body resurface again and again as the shark continued to consume him. Over the next 2 hours, the shark tormented the crowd, pulling and tugging at Vladimir's body. It was truly a nightmare for everyone involved. A lifeguard by the name of Muhammad reportedly swam towards Vladimir and another tourist in the water during the attack. He could see the water surrounding Vladimir was full of blood. He could see how torn up Vladimir was. As he had raised an arm, Muhammad saw the man's hand was missing. He almost dropped the body back into the sea when he noticed the shark had torn his head off. The shark also ripped apart the man's chest. Huge bites were missing from the abdomen as well. It was the most horrifying sight he has ever seen. It was clear Vladimir had already passed away, so instead, he focused his attention on a tourist woman who was swimming close to Vladimir. She was in a state of shock, barely able to move. Muhammad grabbed her under the arms and pulled her back to the shore. There she was comforted and tended to by beachgoers. When the shark had had its fill, authorities were able to capture it. They dragged long nets out behind speedboats and circled the shark. It became trapped and was pulled to shore. It was an enormous tiger shark, measuring 10 feet long. Its distinctive markings were visible across its powerful body. As it was pulled onto the sand, its fate was now sealed. A crowd gathered around to see what a killer shark looks like. Then they began beating it, holding metal bars and wooden sticks. Men began hitting the shark repeatedly across its head and face. The shark attempted to get away, its body powerless on dry land. It flapped its tail and writhed around, desperate for water. After both brutal deaths, the tiger shark was opened up. Inside her stomach were some of Vladimir's remains. It was a gruesome discovery. Vladimir's head and several other body parts were inside the belly. But another discovery may have explained her aggressive behavior and the reason for the devastating attack. Inside her were baby sharks. Tiger sharks lay eggs internally, which then hatch inside the mother. The babies survive inside her until they are ready to be born around 16 months later. Marine expert and fellow Russian Dmitry Orlov came to his own conclusion about what happened and why the shark attacked Vladimir. He believed that being so large and heavily overloaded, her typical prey may have been too quick for her. It was far easier for her to hunt humans who were relatively slow and defenseless in the water. However, biologically and ecologically, this doesn't seem to make sense. But Dmitry believed that his tiger shark was no stranger to human flesh. The year before Vladimir's death, a tiger shark attacked 2 female tourists, an Austrian and a Romanian, in the same location. Other experts have claimed that the shark's behavior may have been influenced by the rising sea temperatures of the Red Sea. She could have been migrating to the Gulf of Suez and cooler waters. Following the attack, Yuri spoke of his son's death. He held no grudge against the Egyptian government and remarkably said that it was tragically Vladimir's destiny to be eaten by the shark. An unusual comment, but one that likely made dealing with his son's death easier to handle. Back in Russia, Vladimir's mother learned of the terrible events. Her son had moved to Egypt to avoid a premature death. He had his whole life ahead of him, and now his mother's world came crashing down. After the forensic examination of Vladimir's body and his remains, Yuri was given permission to cremate him and return the ashes to his homeland of Russia, Vladimir's final resting place. As for the shark, authorities wanted the huge specimen preserved. Perhaps it could serve as some form of education for visiting tourists and locals alike. A team of 5 embalming experts took on the task of mummifying the shark so that it could be put on display in the local museum. The Red Sea has been plagued by shark attacks over the decades. Maybe now it is time to do something about them, as overfishing is removing sharks' prey sources such as large fish like tuna. They turn to other potential prey to satiate their appetite. Moving closer to shore, these incredible predators are more likely to attack again than ever before. Perhaps the Red Sea resorts should install shark nets to protect bathers, a tactic that has proved effective in other parts of the world. Following Vladimir's attack, the beaches were closed. The sea emptied as tourists left the resorts. But a couple of days later, the local government deemed the waters safe again. Speedboats and safety divers maintained a presence along the coastline to reassure visitors and to continue to scout for any potential dangers. But how long will it be before people forget about this tragic event? How long will it be before disaster strikes again, before another innocent swimmer meets their terrifying final affliction? The grizzly bear is a fierce predator and should be avoided at all costs. They have been responsible for over 180 deaths in recent years, although the majority of the time bear attacks are very rare. They will usually only attack when they are protecting food, their cubs, or territory, and would rather avoid humans altogether. However, there are some people who intentionally seek them out and enter their territory, like Timothy Treadwell, aka the Grizzly Man. Even at a young age, Timothy had always been particularly fond of animals, and even had a pet squirrel when he was a child. In his adolescence, he had his first encounter with a wild bear while studying them in Alaska, and that's when he realized his true life calling. He stated that he had lost his way at college, and he had fallen into alcoholism and drug use, nearly overdosing on heroin in the late 80s. This close call with death is what motivated him to initially search out bears and make them his lifelong passion. He studied the bears for 13 years and wrote a book from his findings called Among Grizzlies: Living with Wild Bears in Alaska. During this time, the bears became used to his presence, and he was able to touch them and play with their cubs. In his own words, he stated that he had a good relationship with bears based on mutual trust and respect. Following the release of his book, Timothy began to gain some recognition for his work in television and environmental circles. He traveled around the U.S. to educate local schools and appeared on many TV shows to explain his unique experiences with the animals. He even created his own charity with co-worker Jewel Polovec called Grizzly People, with a plan to continue protecting the grizzly bears in their habitat. Timothy was met with controversy throughout his life, mainly due to his interference with the animals. The National Park Service, in particular, were very unhappy and worried with his actions, as they believed that he was disrupting the animals' natural behavior, as well as putting himself at enormous risk. Timothy was also leading unauthorized tours with visitors to take them closer to the animals, something that was never allowed by the parks. He was thought to be reckless, as he refused to install any electric fences around his camps or carry bear spray, stating that bears would never hurt him due to their relationship together. Despite their fears, Timothy did not bring any further protection from the bears, and he would soon find out that his relationship with these bears could easily be broken. In October 2003, Timothy and his girlfriend, Amy Huguenard, visited Katmai National Park in Alaska. They were warned of the dangers of camping in the area at this time of year, as food was scarce and the bears were preparing for winter, eating anything they could to store for hibernation in the coming months. The aim of the trip was to see one of Timothy's favorite female brown bears and wanted to check that she was okay and ready for the winter. Amy was very reluctant to do this, as she was particularly scared of bears and just wanted to go home, but she stayed as she knew how important the bears were to her boyfriend. Throughout the trip, the pair tracked a few of the bears, but Timothy quickly realized that the majority of the bears that were familiar with him had gone into hibernation already, and there were a number of unfamiliar bears. Although he was slightly uncomfortable with the thought of being surrounded by bears that didn't know him, he still decided to stay and set up camp with Amy. On October 5th, the pair were setting up their video camera to get some more footage of the bears. The setup was nearly complete. The camera was on and recording audio, but the lens cap was still in place, providing no visuals as of yet. Soft rain sounds can be heard as Amy prepares the equipment from inside the tent. Suddenly, Amy calls out to Timothy asking him if he's still out there as she can't hear him. Then the screaming begins. Timothy was screaming to Annie to get out of the tent and to escape as he was torn apart by the large 28-year-old male bear. Amy opens the tent and begins screaming at Timothy to play dead to get the bear to leave him alone, which seemed to have worked for a time as the pair can be heard discussing whether the bear was truly gone yet. In this time, Amy is thought to have approached Timothy to tend to his wounds, which were unknown at this point, but she had to retreat as the bear returned to attack Timothy once again. This is when Timothy begins to panic, as he realizes playing dead is no longer going to work. He begs Amy to hit the bear with something, and she grabs a frying pan to smack the bear in the head. The bear lets go of Timothy's head and instead bites into his thigh to drag him away from Amy. Covered in blood and knowing he has no chance of survival past this point, Timothy begins shouting to Amy, telling her to run away and save herself. Although he struggled, he knew enough about bears to know he was done for. Unlike other victims of bear attacks, he didn't go into shock during the attack and was fully aware the entire time he was eaten alive by the animal that he loved so much. The bear was silent, aside from sporadic growls and grunts. The only real sound that could be heard during this ordeal is the sound of Timothy desperately trying to escape. His screams of agony and the dull sound of his body being dragged across the dirt away from his camp. Unfortunately, Amy still didn't leave. She was frozen with fear and in shock from the horrifying scene. She was already terrified of bears and had just witnessed her worst nightmare. She wasn't familiar with the area, being brought to the park by Timothy, and had no idea how to get back to civilization. On the tape, you can hear her suddenly begin to scream. It was a scream similar to that of a wounded animal, as she realized what she had just witnessed, as well as her situation. Unfortunately, her screams only brought the bear right back to her to finish the job, and Amy was also mauled to death by the same bear. The next morning, air taxi pilot Willie Fulton arrived at Kaflia Lake to transport the pair out of the area. He looked around and thought he could see Timothy shaking a tarp to get his attention, but when Willie called out, there was no response. He decided to hike up the path, but quickly turned around as he felt like something wasn't right. Once he reached his plane, he turned around and saw something that made his blood turn cold. Through the fog, a large, nasty-looking brown bear was staring at him just aside from the path that he had just followed. He quickly climbed back into his plane and set off, hoping to scare the bear off with the engine so that Timothy and Amy would be able to pass through without meeting the bear. He kept his eyes on the bear and could see him slowly eating something. Willie circled the campsite 15 to 20 times, each time trying to get a better look at the bear and what it was eating. That's when he realized that the bear was eating a human rib cage. Horrified, he called the park rangers and asked them to come and survey the area, as he believed something had happened to the bear. A group of rangers arrived and began to trek up to the campsite, with Willie guiding them. They spotted a couple of bears on their way up, but as the bears ignored them, they continued without an issue. Suddenly, one of the rangers shouted, "Bear," alerting the others to the animal about 20 feet away. They began shouting at the bear in an attempt to scare it off, but it soon became clear that it knew they were there, was not threatened, and was actively stalking them. They all began shooting at the bear, firing a total of 21 shots between the three rangers. They didn't stop shooting until the bear was shot dead. They continued to the campsite where they found Timothy and Amy's 2 tents collapsed and torn, with a large mud pile at the front of the entrance. The rangers moved some of the mud aside and found Amy's body with her fingers pushing through the dirt. She had been buried by the bear, ready for winter. When they moved the rest of the mud aside, she looked as though she was peacefully sleeping, except for the clear fact that she had been almost entirely eaten by the bear. They were horrified but determined to find Timothy, although the hopes of him being alive were fading fast. They combed the nearby area and found bits of him scattered all around the forest. His head was found attached to a piece of his spine, with a horrific grimace on his face, capturing the pain in which he died. His right arm and hand were also found lying nearby, his watch still attached. It was a gruesome scene to find. As the rangers were discovering the bodies, another smaller bear attempted to approach them. He was approximately 3 years old and was stalking the team from 30 feet away, making it clear that he would continue to approach and attempt to attack them. He was swiftly shot by the rangers, who didn't want to take any chances given the situation they were in. Once Timothy and Amy's bodies had been extracted from the park, the rangers sent the corpses of the large bear to be investigated. A necropsy was conducted, and it was found that the bear had human remains and clothing within its stomach, concluding that this was the bear that had killed and eaten the couple. The younger bear had already been cannibalized by other bears, so we will never know if it had anything to do with Timothy and Amy's deaths. Ultimately, it's important to remember to respect wild animals and give them the space that they deserve. Even if bonds are formed with the animals, you never know what might happen, or what else might be lingering in the forest, waiting for the chance to bring you to your horrifying final affliction.
It was Sunday, November 29th, 1964. While the usual crowd fancied a day off from working or doing any exciting activity, Henri Bource and his friends were planning on visiting the ocean. Not that Henri was part of the usual crowd to begin with. After all, he was a keen underwater photographer if he was not playing with his saxophone as the lead for a Melbourne-based rock and roll band. The man could do it all, it seemed. So when he had an idea, nobody told Henri he couldn't or shouldn't do it, not even his girlfriend, Jill Ratcliffe. So when Henri planned on visiting the ocean, it was far more riveting than simply dipping one's toes in the beaches of Australia. Filming seals on an ancient and remote island off the coast of Victoria and spearfishing in the surrounding waters was what Henri had in mind on a typical Sunday. Henri prepped with his team to go to Lady Julia Percy Island, a remote offshore volcanic island located 22 kilometers from Port Fairy. Formed some 7 million years ago through violent underwater eruptions, the island was separated from the Australian mainland as the landmass parted ways with Antarctica. The surrounding water on the island is 30 to 50 meters deep. Strong waves are broken up by the sharp rocks on the shores. On the southwest end of the island lay vertical cliffs, rocky coves, shore platforms, and ancient sea caves filled with oceanic critters and mysterious caverns. Interestingly, Lady Julia Percy holds the largest breeding colony of the Australian fur seal. Additionally, the isolated island provides habitat to seabirds that are rare even by Australian wildlife standards. However, where there are fur seals, there is also one of its natural predators, the great white shark. Unbeknownst to Henri and his friends, this would be the day that would change their lives forever. The Victorian Aqualung Club, where Henri belonged, and members of the Port Fairy Manta Skin Diving Club left Moyne River Wharf on board a commercial shark fishing boat. The filmmaker wore a black hooded wetsuit, something that was not uncommon in those days. Eventually, the two groups arrived at the shores of Lady Julia Percy Island, where they were to begin exploring the area and film seals. Parking the boat a few meters off the coast of Lady Julia Percy Island, Henri and his friends Dietmar Krupa and Fred Arndt were talking about a terrifying tale. It wasn't exactly something the usual crowd would talk about right before diving into the ocean and putting themselves at the mercy of the waves. The terrifying tale was about a massive great white shark meandering about in the surrounding area. It was called Big Ben. Although there is hardly any truth to most monster tales such as this, it was not hard to believe in this one at this time, considering the thousands of fur seals one could perceive as far as the eyes could see. Put a man on a boat in the middle of the ocean near a remote island, and you get the perfect ingredients for the most monstrous creature alive, even if only in imagination. However, according to locals who claimed the massive shark was at least 20 feet in length, the creature was very much real, and they had the scars to prove it. For Henri, however, this was merely another exciting opportunity for his portfolio. Henri entered the water at around 12:45 p.m. Swimming in the deep parts, Henri shot a film for an hour or so and came back to the boat around 1:15. Unsatisfied with the first film roll, Henri entered the waters once again. This time, he was accompanied by Dietra and Fred, both of whom were equipped with shorthand spears. Nobody could have predicted they would emerge from this dive forever changed by the events to come. Doing a free dive, the three friends found a group of seals rolling around in the waves. Henri immediately turned to film and focused on a bull seal amongst the harem. Suddenly, the seals turned tail and the energetic waves became quiet. Something was not quite right. However, because of the poor visibility in the water, the divers couldn't quite make out what was happening. They dove deeper, 10 meters down, and hugged the bottom. Still, they couldn't find the seals and realized they had to make an ascension. Henri broke through the surface and his head emerged. However, an incredible force hit him like a freight train the second his head broke the surface. Before he could understand what was happening, Henri knew what attacked him and threw his arms into the air to signal to the other divers. He screamed at the top of his lungs, "Shark!" Suddenly, he was torn through the water with incredible ferocity and was dragged below. He couldn't do anything about it. The water burst into chaos. The force pulling Henri down was so strong his mask and snorkel were ripped off from his face. And then from there, in a split second, he caught a glimpse of the marauding perpetrator. It was a great white shark. It was Big Ben. The creature had latched itself onto his leg. It shook him like a dog shaking someone's old slipper. Henri desperately tried reaching for the creature's eyes, but its large snout was getting in the way. He felt the searing pain of the shark's teeth puncturing his calf as he scrambled his hand across its face. Beyond the pain, there was a more pressing matter. Henri was drowning. He had been holding his breath for around 45 seconds as the onslaught continued. He was suffocating as the massive creature tugged at him and rolled him from side to side. Henri could remember the conversation he had on the boat about Big Ben. He was filled with fear and desperation. And then suddenly, the tugging and rolling stopped. Henri could almost sense a moment of peace. He swam towards the surface and broke through, gasping for as much air as he could. He groped around his left leg, but it was not there anymore. The shark had torn it away. Despite the immense shock, Henri managed to muster his focus. Dietmar and Fred reached Henri. However, he wasn't out of the woods yet, because the shark was back for more. Gaining a taste for Henri, the creature approached him again, eager for another bite at the defenseless filmmaker. However, Dietmar and Fred fought the beast off using their small hand spears. The shark came back at least 5 times, and each time, Dietmar and Fred fought against it. The creature was so persistent in coming at Henri, the hand spears were warped in the scuffle. Eventually, the dive boat sped towards the commotion. Jill grabbed the safety line, and eventually Henri was brought onto the boat. Henri immediately received first aid on the boat. As he bled profusely, the other divers brought him to the center and swiftly applied a tourniquet to his injury. Even though there were still members on the island, Henri's case was much more urgent. The captain decided to head towards the hospital and come back for the other members of the island later. The captain immediately called for help and a blood transfusion. When they arrived at Port Fairy, there was already an ambulance waiting with a few liters of blood. According to the doctor, Henri lost 3.5 liters of blood in the attack. He was rushed to Warrnambool Hospital. There were 2 main theories that sprung up from the incident. Firstly, according to Dietmar, Henri was petting a dog at the beach and on the boat. The dog's scent was carried over to Henri, prompting the shark to attack him. The other theory was that Henri was wearing a wetsuit lined with the color yellow. According to experts and 2 Australian universities, sharks are colorblind, but they are keenly aware of contrasting objects. Under the murky waters of Lady Julia Percy Island that day, the yellow color markings on Henri's swimsuit would have been a stark contrast to the surrounding waters, possibly attracting the attention of one of the great white sharks. However, many people argue that the chances of being attacked are far less than being lost at sea. After all, bright colors help with getting found by rescue teams. Nevertheless, Henri was attacked viciously despite being surrounded by seals. He was lucky to be alive. Eventually, Henri made a full recovery and was back in the waters after a few weeks. In 1968, he released a documentary called Savage Shadow, where part of the actual footage of the attack and a reenactment was shown. In a later interview, Henri did not hold grudges against the creature. To him, they were simply acting according to their nature. Luckily for Henri, he was surrounded by a group of divers who were highly skilled and trained. Some people aren't so lucky. Additionally, Henri viewed losing his leg as part of his luck, as it helped him survive and be freed from the shark's grasp. But unlike most great white shark attacks performing a test bite, this shark was keen on eating Henri alive as it returned for him 5 separate times. If it wasn't for Henri's friends, he would have certainly met his unfortunate final affliction.